Well, I started working with cooperatives after I found them as a student in an economics textbook in an unassigned portion of reading, which I think is worth noting. But I was kind of engaged as being with student activism. So I attempted to form 2 student co-ops that kind of were solutions to problems that I was being active around and doing some kind of campaigning and things of that nature. 2 of them failed. Then one succeeded, and that kind of propelled me into a cooperative career path. So we started a student cooperative that was also for students and community members, and it was a housing cooperative in my college town where I went to university in the US. And then I continued working with student housing co-ops at a local and a regional and then a continental level thereafter. The biggest challenges in those failures were in institutional pressures. We attempted to form on campus. In the US, forming on campus, doing anything on campus in terms of enterprise is really difficult because of exclusivity contracts. These range from exclusivity contracts with Coca-Cola, who has a total monopoly over any soft drink that is consumed or sold on the campus. Also, a lot of the facilities, like the meeting rooms, the meeting rooms, the hotel, the lodgings, all of these kinds of places are also maintained through contracts with folks like Marriott. Cisco is also another frequent contract that really is locked in with universities, so there's always a barrier to using space, to bringing in food, essentially to having any kind of student choice as a consumer on the campus. These are all huge barriers. And in fact, trying to start food co-ops on campus using the community co-op and asking to have them come in to do kind of kiosks for just kind of soft drinks or like grab and go food, that was blocked because we couldn't legally do it because of the Coke contract and because of the Marriott contracts. And then the second initiative was to start a university student-owned consumer bookstore because Barnes & Noble had recently just bought out all of the university bookstores. Barnes & Noble sent us a cease and desist letter, and when we reserved a room in the library to do a student kind of fundraising book swap so people wouldn't have to buy new textbooks every year, we mysteriously got our room reservation, our room reservation mysteriously disappeared, and that kind of stopped that initiative. Yeah, but in general, in terms of student co-op challenges, I would say definitely transience and education and awareness are just huge obstacles. Transience is a problem because usually by the time people even find out that a co-op exists or that they can become a member of a co-op or what it even means, even after they've lived there for a while, they're usually on their way out. And then in the US, we don't have a lot of places to launch people into that have a newly found awareness about cooperatives. Like, there'll be hard scientists who say, I want to do the work that I do cooperatively. And it's like, well, you could start your own co-op, but that's, a whole ball of wax in terms of capital, setting up, high, intensive industry kind of setups and intensive businesses like research, hard science research. These are not things that, maybe a 19-year-old is really interested in conquering on their own. But that said, transience is always a huge issue. But one of the ways in which I've seen great success happen in overcoming the challenge of transience is to expand kind of the bond of student cooperative to include youth. So you can include recent graduates who have a lot of capital of their own in terms of human experience and also experience directly within that student and that larger community to add to the cooperative effort. And then also linking it just in some way with institutions in the community. So not keeping everything on campus, because not only will you not stay on campus forever, but nothing's going to stay on that campus forever in the context of having exclusivity contracts and other things that make cooperative development on campuses really challenging. The biggest kind of prop to engagement and participation for students that I found was when I was in an executive director capacity at a local system of cooperatives that operated, cooperative houses that operated largely collectively, was to offer some sort of economic participation in the form of a financial incentive for fulfilling some sort of managerial duties. So a lot of the student co-ops rely heavily on volunteerism, which I think by and large is not going to work when you're working with people who have so many other distractions and so many other things that are promising them, certain returns and are promising them certain experiences, that if, number one, it's kind of hard to articulate and to educate people in exactly what the return is on participating in a cooperative structure, particularly when they're young and this is their first cooperative experience. So it's a competitive, getting a young person's attention is pretty competitive. And when you're asking for their attention in the form of work, volunteerism just doesn't really work. So financial support. I think also sending young people out of these local and these individual cooperative experiences to these larger sectoral, national or international events plays a huge role in people really becoming aware of the profundity that the profundity of the cooperative model and all of the possibilities that the cooperative model holds for them in their career as a worker and also in their consumption choices and their living choices. And I have found that when students that I've been working with, or when I myself was a student, when I went away to one of these larger events, I came back and they came back saying very much like, wow, this is what I want to do with my life, that this is work that is meaningful and this is a community that values my participation and through which I can also find value. I think the reason for the cooperative and why it's so essential for the student experience is, I think at its most basic, it creates more contributive citizens. I've heard people say, and maybe this is a little bit cheesy, but it just kind of makes better people. And still further, I think having the student experience in a cooperative organization helps you to understand how you can transition out into the quote-unquote real world, or how you can become a more productive worker, and how you can make your consumption choices. I think a lot of people don't receive any guidance on, hey, there are options out there for how to be an economic agent, how to be a social agent, how to be, a citizen in the world. They're taking cues from mass media, from pop culture, and that's sending a very narrow viewpoint, and that's just one path. And illustrating the cooperative context and the cooperative experience provides people an alternative. And I think even if they ultimately don't choose a cooperative career path, or they don't choose to do everything cooperatively, having that cooperative experience does open them up to understanding that there are different paradigms. So at least they're going to go out and see what works better and what works for them and what they think works for the greater good. My experience, the last GA that I attended was in Cancun, and I would say that it definitely does feel more youthful here. Maybe not because of the sheer numbers of how many youth were here versus the previous General Assembly, but because there was a space dedicated to youth, for youth, and by youth. It wasn't a panel on youth engagement in which people who were not youth were speaking and that kind of thing, because that really just does not, that doesn't provide an inclusive air, that doesn't encourage youth participation. So creating the space and creating the youth network, which we're still in process of doing, is very important to kind of make this an inclusive event and an inclusive organization. But I do think that there weren't enough youth here, and I don't think there are ever going to be enough youth here, because I think if all the people who wanted to come to this conference could, there'd be a lot more people here. This really just generally flying somewhere in the world and paying a large registration fee is pretty inaccessible to most people, let alone young people who have minimal to no, income, particularly if they're non-working students. So I would say in order to foster greater youth engagement, because I do think these kinds of events are very important in creating and helping to educate young people who are going to move on to be big cooperative thinkers and cooperative movement organizers, and the kinds of folks who will do the work that is necessary to think at national and international levels about cooperative strategy, that we need to financially support young people to come to this event. The ICDI does do a great service by offering a greatly reduced registration fee for young people. That should definitely continue. But I think the ICA members need to come forward to put into some sort of combined fund, or some sort of combining of resources to ensure that there is representation of youth from all corners of the world. Because there are only 2 young people from North America here, so there's definitely more of us.